Hey there, how's it going everybody? In this video, we're going to continue our Django series by learning how to use forms and also how to validate user input to create a user registration page. So the application that we're creating is going to have the ability for users to create an account, log in, make posts, and things like that. And the first part of that process is to create the registration page where a user can create an account on the website and then be able to log in and log out. Now, the admin page that we've seen in previous videos might be good enough if you're the only person using your site, but if you're making an application that anyone else can sign up to or will be using, something like a Twitter or a YouTube or something like that, then you'll have to have another way for people to create an account and log in to your page other than the admin page, because none of those sites I just mentioned give you access to their admin sites when you're ready to make an account or write posts. They provide front-end forms for you to do that kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to be doing in this video. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, the first thing that we should do is to think about how the user logic will relate to our project as a whole. So the user account portion of our project is going to have its own forms and templates and routes and things like that. And that is logically going to be separate from the blog itself. So the best thing to do here would probably be to create a new app inside of our project where all of that is going to be contained in its own section. That way we know when we want to update something with our user accounts, then we'll know exactly where to look. We can just look in a user app. So first of all, let's go ahead and create a new app. And we've already seen how to do this when we created our blog app. So in our command line, we need to be navigated to our project directory. So this is going to be where that manage.py file is located. And to create our user's app, we can simply say, let me click on here. We can simply say Python manage.py start app, and now the name of our app. And we'll just name this app users. And so that will create the app that will handle all of the user logic for us. So now if we open our project in an editor, then we should be able to see our new users app within our project. Okay, so now we can see that it did create that new users app. So now we have our blog and we have our users apps, and then we have our Django project main project folder. Okay, so now we can see that we have that users app, and now we want to create a user registration page where users can sign up and create accounts from the front end of our website. Now, first of all, remember what I said when we created our blog app. When we first create a new app, let's go ahead and immediately add it to our installed apps list in our project settings, and that will save us a lot of headache and debugging if we forget to do that. So I'm going to open up our project settings.py file. And then I'll scroll down here to our installed apps. Now we can see that we added the blog.apps.blog config. Now you can probably guess what this will be. It'll probably be users.apps.users config. But just to make sure, if you want to check that, you can just open up your app. So I'll open up the users app here and go to that apps.py file within there. And then that is where your user config class is going to live. So this is what we want to add to our installed apps. So I'll go back to our installed apps here, and remember this is a string. So that's going to be users.apps.usersconfig. And don't forget to put a comma after that because that installed apps is a list. Okay, so now first things first, let's start with the view that will handle the logic for this register route. So we won't create the URL pattern just yet. So first, let's open up our views.py module within our users app, and we can see that this is a fresh views file. And now let's create a register view. So right here where it says create your views, we'll create a register view, and that's just a function. And remember that this has to use the request, so we will pass that in. And now we need to create a form that is going to be passed to the template that we will create for this view. Now, if you were to create forms from scratch, then it can get pretty complicated pretty fast. So you'd have to put in different kinds of validation checks to make sure that the user was inserting information correctly, make sure that their hashed passwords matched. You might have to write some regular expressions to make sure that they entered a valid email, and all kinds of things that can be extremely complicated. But luckily, this process is so common that we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. So Django takes care of a lot of this stuff for us on the back end. So this is kind of similar to the database models in the sense that we can create Python classes, and these classes generate HTML forms for us. And some classes already exist. So for example, we want a registration form so users can sign up for our site. Now in this case, we can simply use the user creation form that already exists in Django. So like I said, these forms will be classes that will get converted into HTML. So we can create our own forms, and we'll do that in just a bit. But for now, if we want a form to create a new user, then Django already provides that kind of form for us. We just need to import it. So we can import this up here at the top simply by saying from django.contrib.auth.forms import user creation form. And it's easy to mess these up. Make sure all of this is spelled correctly. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so now let's use this form in our register view. Now to do that, we just need to simply create an instance of the form. So I can just say form is equal to user creation form and put the parentheses there to create a new instance. And now let's render a template that uses this form. Now this template doesn't exist yet, but we'll create it in just a second. So let's go ahead and render this. So I'll just say return render. And remember, the first argument to render is the request object. And now our template. So we haven't created this template yet, but we will in just a second. So I will create this in users/register.html. And now let's pass in our form as the context to that template so that we can access the form from within the template. And remember, to do that, we can just simply pass in a dictionary, and we want to access that from a variable of form, and the value that we want that to have is the new instance of our user creation form that we just created there. Okay, so now we just need to create the template that uses this form variable that we just passed in. So to create this, we can create a templates directory within our users app, just like we did with our blog app. So I'll say new folder, and I'll call this templates. And then remember, within templates, it's the Django convention to now create another subdirectory with the name of the app. So this, we are in the users app. So I'm going to create another new folder and call this users. And now within this users subdirectory in templates, we can create our template. And we want this to be register.html. And just like we saw in our templates video, we're going to want to extend the base template and then fill in our content block. So just to get us started, let me go ahead and grab a template that already exists that has some of this information filled in. So I'm just going to use the about template from our blog app. So I'm going to copy all of that and paste this into our register template. So we can see here that we're extending the blog base HTML template. So even within our users app, we can reference templates from our blog app, which is really nice. And now we want to put our form in a div with a class of content section. So I'm going to create a new div here, and let's give this a class. And this is just a custom class that is within our CSS file that we've already added. And I'm going to call this content section. And that part's just for styling. The important part here is the form. So now within this div, we're going to create a new form. And our form, let's give this a method equal to post. And if you don't know what that post method means, then don't worry about it quite yet. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But now let's go ahead and continue with our form. So within our form, we need to add something called a CSRF token. Now this is a hidden tag, and it is something that you need to add here, but don't worry too much about what it does. It's adding something called a CSRF token, or a cross-site request forgery token, and this will protect our form against certain attacks. So it's just some added security that Django requires. So we're going to need to add this to every form, but don't worry too much about the underlying details. Now, if you don't have it, then your form won't work, so we have to put it in. So at the top of our form here, inside of our form, we're going to put a code block there, and we'll say CSRF underscore token. And once we have that token in place, now we can simply access the form variable that we passed in to the context of this template. But first, I'll put in a field set tag, which is used to group related elements in a form. And I'll also add a legend for our form as well. So I will say field set, and within field set, I will give this a class equal to form dash group. This is just a bootstrap class. And now I'll give this form a legend, and this will just give our form a little bit more detail. So I'm going to give this some bootstrap classes as well. So I'm going to give this a class of border dash bottom, and also MB, which is margin bottom, of 4. So we'll save that, and we will give the form a legend of join today. Okay, so with those in place, now let's just print out our form. So we can simply just access that form variable that we passed into the context just like this, and that should print out our entire form. So just specifying that form variable will display all of the form labels and fields that we need. But we also need a submit button for our form as well, and that's not going to be included in the form. So we'll add this after the field set, and we'll add some styles to this as well just to make it look a little nicer. So I will give this, put this in a div, and this div I will give a class of form dash group. And within this div, let's create a button, and this is going to be our submit button. So we can just have this button say sign up. And now let's also give this button some bootstrap classes as well, so it looks a little nicer. So I'll give this a bootstrap class of btn, which is button, then btn dash outline dash info. And we also have to specify the type of this button. So this type of button is a submit button. So that's all lowercase there. So this is a submit button with sign up text. Okay, and lastly, let's add one more thing here. So remember that we're creating a register page where new users are going to create accounts. Now, in a lot of websites, you'll see where they have a link on the register page that says, do you already have an account? If you already have an account, then just go sign in instead of creating a new account. So let's put something like that here as well. So let's put this under our form. So underneath our form, I'm going to put another div, and let's give this some classes as well just to separate this out a little bit. I'll give this a class of border dash top, and then also I'll give it a padding top of 3, so pt-3. And now let's just put some small text here at the bottom that says, do you already have an account? Well, if so, then just go ahead and go sign in. So we'll have this be small text, and we'll also give this a class equal to text muted, which in Bootstrap is just some kind of dull text that doesn't stand out a lot. So the text here will say already have an account ? And let's actually spread this out on 2 lines here so we can see everything. So after the question mark here, then we'll just say already have an account and then put a link to the sign up page or to the sign in page. So I'll create an anchor tag here, and that anchor tag, we'll just have that go nowhere for now. So I'll put that hashtag or # there. And I'm also going to give this a class here with a margin left. So I'll say ml-2, which is a margin left with a value of 2. That way it's just split up from this text a little bit. So now within this link, we'll just have this link say sign in. So I think this is a good template for our register page right now. We'll add some additional validation feedback to this form later on. Okay, so our register page is almost ready to go. We only need to do one more thing. We need to create a URL pattern that uses our register view so that we can navigate to this page in the browser. So in our blog app, we created our own URLs module for the blog, and we could do the same thing here, but I'm going to hold off on that for now and just import our view directly within our project's urls.py module and create a URL pattern for it there. So let me show you what I mean. So let's open up our actual project's URLs module, and this is the one that has the path to our admin page and the empty path to our blog URLs. So like I was saying, we could have created a URLs module inside of our users app like we did with our blog and then included it within a pattern here. But instead, I'm just going to use the view directly by importing it. So I'll say from users, import views, and we'll import that as user_views because it's possible to import multiple views. So you want to, change this to whatever app it is with the _views there. Okay, so now let's create a URL pattern that uses our register view. So underneath admin here, I will create another path, And the path that we want to use, we'll say if they go to /register, then we want to send them to the register view that we just created. So that would be userviews.register. And let's also give this a name as well. So I'll say name is equal to, and we'll just set that name equal to register. And also at the end here, just like with our other URL patterns, this is a list. So don't forget the comma there. It's easy to forget the commas within these lists. Okay, so now let's view our application in the browser and make sure that everything that we've done so far is working. So let's save all of this, and all of this looks to be saved. Now I'll bring up my terminal and make sure that our development server is running, and it's not right now. So we'll say python manage.py run server and run that. We didn't get any errors, so that's good. And now let's pull this up in our browser. So we'll go to localhost port 8000. And now let's go to that register route and see if everything works. So I'll go to /register and run that. And we can see that it did work. We have a page here with a legend of join today, and we have a user registration form here. Now, even with the styles that we added in, this isn't very pretty, but we'll fix this with better styles in just a minute. But for now, there's one small change that we can make to make this look slightly better, and that is to use a form method called as_p, which will render our form in paragraph tags, and at least that will split this up into a few more lines than it is now. So let's go back to our register template and make that small change. So for now, notice here how password flows onto this next line here, and it just doesn't look very good at all. So let me go back to our register template, which we have open here. And where we printed out that form, we're going to use this as_p method. So I'll say .as_p, and that will render our form in paragraph tags. So now, if we go back and reload this page, then now that split up a little bit. So now this password is on its own line. It still doesn't look great, but we'll improve this with better styles in just a second. But that's a small improvement. Okay, but we can see that how by using that user creation form, it gave us all of this out of the box. It has a username, a password field, and a password confirmation field. And it's also printing out all of the validation stuff that the user needs. So it is showing us the character limits here. It's telling us that the password, has to contain at least 8 characters, can't be commonly used passwords, and stuff like that. So it's really nice that we get all of that stuff out of the box without even needing to write a form for ourselves. Now, what happens if we fill this out right now? So if I fill this out with some info here, so I'll try to create a new user called new user, set the password to testing321, and sign up. So when we submit that, we can see that it just redirects us back to the current page and wipes out all of the information that we just entered. It's not really doing anything with that information right now. So if we were to open our admin page right now, then we would see that there were no new users that were being created whenever we just submitted that. And the reason it's not doing that is because this is performing a post request on our register route with the form information that we submitted, but we're not doing anything with that information yet. So if we go back to our register view, so we'll open this up and close these down and just look at our register view here, then we can see that any request that comes into this route, we're simply creating a blank form and rendering it out to the template. So for those of you who know about HTTP requests, there are different types of requests that we can have. The most basic kind are GET requests, and that's what you send when you just navigate to the page normally. And there are also POST requests. And when we created our form, we said that the method that we wanted to use for that form was POST. And since we didn't specify where to post that form data, it actually just posts it right back to this route. So we can put in a conditional and specify that if we get a POST request, then we can try to validate our form data, because that POST request is going to contain that data in the message body. So we'll put in a conditional to specify that if we get a POST request, then we'll try to validate that form data. And if it's a GET request, then we'll just simply do what we're doing now by displaying a blank form. So let's put a check in place. So to do this, we can, at the top here, just say if request dot method is double equal to, which checks for equality, string of uppercase post. Then we want to, let me copy this form creation here. Then we want to create a form that has the request.post data. And then we can put in our else. So anything that is not a post request, we will just create a blank form. Okay, so again, at this point, if we get a post request, then it instantiates a user creation form with that post data. But with any other request, it just instantiates an empty form. And that post data will most likely be the data from our form, but really it could be anything. So we're going to need to validate it so that we know that we're getting the fields and data that we expect. And to do this, we can use another conditional within, after we've instantiated with the post data. We can say, okay, well, is our form valid? So we can say if form dot is underscore valid. And as you can tell by the name, this will tell us if our form is valid when it is submitted. And if that data is valid, then let's go ahead and grab the username that was submitted for now. So to do this, we can simply say username is equal to form.cleaned underscore data.get, and we want to get that username. So the validated form data will be in this form.cleaned.data dictionary. And this will have been nicely converted into Python types for us from the form. So now I'm going to use something called a flash message to show that we've received valid data. A flash message is an easy way for us to send one-time alerts to a template that will only be displayed once and will disappear on the next request. So first we have to import this. So at the top here, I can say from Django.contrib import messages. And now we can add a message by specifying what kind of message we'd like to add. So there are different types of messages here. So just let me type all of these out. So there is message.debug, and I will copy this. There is also message.info. There is message.success. There's message.warning, and there is message.error. So since we're going to display a message if our form data is valid, let's use this message.success since our data was valid. So I'm going to just copy that one, and I'll get rid of the other ones here. I just wanted to show you the options that we have. And within our form.isValid conditional, I'm going to say message, and this should be messages, messages.success, because messages is what we imported, messages.success. And the first argument here is the request. So we'll pass in that request. And now we'll pass in our message. So I'm going to use an F string here. And F strings are only available in Python 3.6 or above. If you're not using Python 3.6 or above, then you could use formatted strings. So we'll say account created for, and then we will just pass in that username in the placeholder. Okay, so now that we've got our flashed message, now let's redirect the user to a different page, because you don't want to fill out a form and then just get redirected back to the same form after you submit it, because that would be a little confusing depending on what the form is. So instead, let's redirect the user back to the home page. Now to do this, we're going to need to import the redirect function, and that is in the same shortcuts module as the render function. So we can just come up here to the top, and after render, we can say import redirect as well. And now, after our added message, we can just say that we want to return a redirect, spelled that wrong there, return a redirect to blog-home. And again, we've seen this before, but this blog-home is the name that we gave to our URL pattern for the blog homepage. Okay, so this should all work except for one thing. We haven't added, or we haven't updated our template to actually show the flashed messages yet. So I'm going to put this within our base template so that any flashed messages pop up on any page. So let's open that up. So our base template is within our blog app. So within our blog app, we'll open up our templates. Then there's a blog subdirectory in there. And then we want to look in that base template. And again, the reason that I'm putting the messages here is because this is the template that gets displayed on every page with our navigation bar and things like that. So putting the messages here will make sure that any message that we flash will show up on any page. So I think a good place for our messages would be to display them right above our content block. So I'm going to scroll down until we see our content block here, which we can see is in this div with the column of 8. So right above our content block, this is where we'll put our messages. So to do this, we can use a code block here. So the curly braces with the 2% signs, and let me get rid of that one there. And within here, we can put a conditional that says if messages, and then we need to end that if statement as well. So we'll say end if. And now within this conditional, if Django sees that we have flashed messages that we have sent into our template, then now we can loop over those. So I will put in another code block here and say for message in messages. And again, we will end this for loop by saying end for. And now within this for loop, now we can print out each flashed message. So I will put this in a div, and I will give this some Bootstrap classes. Bootstrap has some nice classes for alerts. So I'll say class is equal to alert, and we also want to specify what kind of alert this is. Now, Bootstrap has a class called alert-success, and that is just this kind of nice green alert that they pop up. Now, one nice thing about Bootstrap and Django is that the messages are the same as the Bootstrap alerts. So for example, we're using a success message here. So if we just use that tag and say, alert dash, and then pass in the message tag, then it should, say either success or info or danger or anything like that, whatever type of message that is. So to grab that message tag, we can actually just get that by doing our double curly braces and saying message.tags. So for a success message, this will be alert-success. For an info message, it'll be alert-info and things like that. Okay, so now within our message div here, now let's just print out the message. So we will just access that with the double curly braces and specify that we want to see the message. Okay, so now that we have that in place, that should display our messages properly. And now let's make sure that all of this works together and see if our form validates properly. So let's save all the changes that we made and make sure that our dev server is still running, and it is. And now let's try to reload our page and see if our form submits successfully. So I will try to create a new user. I'll do a password of testing321, testing321, and sign up. So now we can see that we get directed back to our home page with a flash message that our account for new user has been created. Now we didn't actually create an account for that user. We'll do that in just a second, but now we know that our forms are at least validating correctly and giving us some kind of feedback. Now, these flash messages are nice because, like I said, they are only one-time alerts. So if I was to reload the home page here, then that alert goes away. It was just a one-time thing. Now, that current registration form that we have already does have some built-in validation. So if I go back to that register route, and if I was to fill this out incorrectly, so if I was to, try to create a user that already exists, so we'll use that Corey MS user, and I'll also put in passwords that just don't match. So if we click sign up, then we got some validation errors. Now these validation errors might be hard to see with our current styles, but we can see right here it says a user with that username already exists, and down here it says the two password fields didn't match. And we can see that when that form was invalid, it still gives us our username that we tried to input. So it didn't just create a completely new form from scratch. It still has the values that we had inputted there. Now, the reason for that is because of how we set up our views. So let's go back to our views and see exactly what this did. So I'll go back to our views.py file. So now let's walk through this process of an invalid form. So when we submitted our form, then it's submitted as a post request. So it comes into this conditional here and it says, was the request a post request? And it was. So then it comes in here and says, okay, well, I want to create a new form, and I want to create a form that has the data that was within request.post. So then it has a new form with our username data and our two password fields. And then it says, okay, is our form valid? And that is whenever Django does the back-end checks with our user creation form. And the user creation form handles all of that for us. And it says, well, no, it's not valid because you already have a username with this username. And also your passwords don't match. So it never reaches this conditional here to return that success page. Instead, it falls down to this return statement here. And it just says, render our register.html template with our form. But remember, our form was the one that was instantiated with our request data. So it's still going to have those form fields filled in with the value that we had submitted. And whenever it saw that our form was not valid, it also added some error messages that it would pass along to that template as well. So that's why those error messages also showed up. Okay, so there are a few more changes that I'd like to make to our form. So first, let's set this up so that it's actually saving the user when our form validates. And after we get that working, then I'd like to add an additional field and have the user enter their email address as well, because right now it's just their username. And lastly, I would also like to get our form looking a lot nicer and also to display our validation feedback to our end users in a better format so that they know exactly what's wrong so that they can fix it quickly. So first, let's get this set up so that the user is actually created if the form is valid. And this is pretty simple. So if we go into our conditional where we check to make sure that the form data was valid, then saving the user is just as simple as saying form.save. And that's it. That's all we have to do. So it couldn't be any easier than that. Now that will automatically hash the password to make that secure and everything else that it needs to do in the background. So we don't need to do anything other than just run that save method. So now with that in place, if we go back to our browser and try to create a new user again. So again, let me make sure that our dev server is still running. It is. So now if I reload this register page and create a new user and testing 321, and sign up, then now let's see if that user was actually created. So I'm going to go to the admin page and I'm going to log in as my admin user, which is Corey MS testing 321, log in and go to users. And if I make this a little larger, we can see that we have a new user here. So our form was able to actually create that new user from the front end of our website. But if we look at the email addresses form here, we can see that our other two users have an email address, but our new user doesn't. Now we don't want to have to, go into the admin panel and add an email address for everybody after they've created an account. We'd really just like that to be on our register form. So let's add some more fields to our registration form. So I'm going to go back to our site here, and now let's pull up our register template. So within our user templates, I'm going to open up register.html. So we can see here in our register template that we're not printing out any of these fields individually. All we're doing is printing out this single form, and it's printing out all of the fields for us. So in order to add a new field, we actually have to add that to the form itself. So how do we add a field to our user creation form? So to do this, we're going to actually need to create a new form that inherits from our user creation form. So to do this, we need to first create a file where we can put these new forms. So I'll create another file in our user's application directory, and I'll call this forms.py. So within our root directory of our user's app, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this forms.py. Okay, so within this file, we're going to create our first form that inherits from the user creation form. So first, we need to do a few imports. So we need to import forms from Django. So we'll say from Django, import forms. And then on the next line, we need to import our user model. So I'll say from django.contrib.auth.models, import user. And lastly, we will do an import on that user creation form. So that is from django.contrib.auth.forms, import user creation form. And now we'll create a new form that inherits from the user creation form. So I'm going to create a new class, a new form that inherits from that user creation form. And I'm just going to type all this out for now, and we'll go over this after I get this typed out. So I'm going to call this user register form. and then we want to inherit from that user creation form. And now we want to add the fields, additional fields that we want to this user creation form. So I want the email. So I'll say email is equal to forms.email field. Now that can take an argument that is called required. So we can set required equal to false if we don't want them to, if it's optional for them to provide their email. But the default is required is equal to true. And I'm just going to leave the default. So I'm not going to put anything there. So now I'm going to do something here that might look a little strange. I want to say class meta, and within meta, we're going to specify the model that we want this form to interact with. So the model is going to be user, because whenever this form validates, it's going to create a new user. And now we can say fields is equal to, and these are the fields that are going to be shown on our form. So the fields that we want to be shown, and in what order also. So we want to display the username, and then we want them to fill out their email, and then they need those matching passwords. So that field is going to be called password1, and then the password confirmation is going to be password2. Okay, so let me talk a little bit more about this class meta here. Now, this class meta gives us a nested namespace for configurations and keeps the configurations in one place. And within the configuration, we're saying that the model that will be affected is the user model. So for example, when we do a form.save, it's going to save it to this user model. And the fields that we have here in this list are the fields that we want in the form and in what order. Okay, so this is now our completed form. So now we have a completed form that inherits from the user creation form and adds this email field. And now we can just use this form in our view instead of the user creation form. And then that should make it good to go. So let's go back to our views here. And at the top, let's inherit the form that we just created. So I will say from.forms import. And remember, we called that user register form. Was it user register form or user registration? Yes, user register form. And now we can use this user register form with that email field instead of the user creation form. And we need to replace this in both locations. So we see that we have one instantiation here inside of the post request, and we have one instantiation inside the GET request. So you want to save, or you want to replace both of those. So I'll replace both of those creation forms with user register form. And now we're not using our user creation form anymore. So we can just get rid of that. And now I'll save my file. So with those changes in place, now let's make sure that we don't have any errors in our web server, and we don't. So now let's reload this in our browser. So I'm going to go to /register. Whoops, spelled that wrong. /register. And we should now see that there is a field for the email here. So now if we create another user, so now let me create a new user 2, and I will set their email equal to nu2@company.com, and then put in a password of testing321, and sign up. So now let's look at this new user 2 inside of our admin page. So if I navigate to the admin page, make this a little larger here, and go to users, then we can see that now we have a new user 2, and this new user 2 has an email address listed. So it did work, and it did submit that email address with that form and save it to the database. Okay, so now we have a nice working form, but one thing is that we really need to overhaul the style on this a bit. So if I go to /register, we can see that this still isn't looking very good. So right now, it doesn't have the Bootstrap styles that match the rest of our site. And also, we don't need all of this validation information displayed so large. It can be a lot smaller, and a lot more muted. And also, if there are any validation problems when we submit, then we can display them in red so that they pop out a little bit, so that it's more clear what the user needs to change in order to get the form to validate. Now, in terms of adding classes to our form fields, there are ways that we can set classes on our form fields in the forms.py file that we just created, but that's actually not a great place for them because I think that mixes our presentation with our backend logic, and it would be better if we could do all of that styling within our template. So instead, to do this, we're going to use a third-party Django application that makes working with forms a lot easier. And this application is called Crispy Forms, and it's a very popular way to do this on Django. So Crispy Forms will allow us to put some simple tags in our template that will style our forms in a bootstrap fashion. And there are other CSS frameworks that you can use with Crispy Forms as well. So first, we need to install Crispy Forms. So to do this, I'm going to bring up our terminal here where our dev server is running, and I'm going to stop that for now and clear the screen. And now we want to install Crispy Forms. So to do this, we can say pip install, and this is Django-crispy-forms. So let's install that, and that installed successfully. So once that is installed, we need to tell Django that this is an installed app. And if we remember, we can do this within our project's settings module. So let's open up our project settings module. So within Django project, open up settings. Let's go down to installed apps. And right underneath our users config, I'm going to add in that Crispy Forms. So I'll say crispy_forms. And then don't forget the comma since this is a list. And while we're here in our settings, let's also tell Crispy Forms which CSS framework we want to use. So it defaults to Bootstrap 2, but Bootstrap 2 is pretty old and outdated at this point. So instead, let's use Bootstrap 4. So let's go to the very bottom of our settings file and add that here. So the setting that we need to change is something called crispy_template_pack. So crispy template pack. And we will set that equal to Bootstrap 4. Now, if you want to change this to anything else, then you can go to the Crispy documentation online, and it shows you how to change these settings to anything that you want. But I think Bootstrap 4 is our best bet. Okay, so once we have said that we want to use Bootstrap 4 for our CSS template, then we can simply load this into our template and use it. So I'm going to open up our register.html template where our form lives. And at the top, right under where we extend our base template, let's load in these Crispy form tags. So we can do this simply by creating a code block here and then say load, and we want to load crispy_forms_tags. So let's save that. And that will actually allow us to use the Crispy filter on any of our forms. So if we go down here to our form, now we no longer need this as_p method on the form since Crispy Forms will take care of all of that formatting for us. So I'm just going to remove that to where we only have our form. And now we can use the vertical bar character to specify that we want to use a filter. So we saw this in an earlier video when we used the date filter to format our post dates. So after the vertical bar, we can simply say that we want to use the Crispy filter. So we can just say Crispy and save that. And that's really all it takes. That will do all of the styling for us. Now, there are ways that we can customize this styling further, but I think that Crispy does a good job out of the box of styling our forms and also giving us some good validation feedback. So now let's run our web server and see how this looks compared to what it did. So I'm going to run our dev server by saying Python manage.py run server, no errors, so that's good. Now let's open our page back up. And now this is what our register page looks like now. So now let's rerun this and see how it looks. So when we reload that, we can see that these forms look a lot better. And if we look at the source code here, so I'll go to view source and make this a little larger and then scroll down here to our fields, then you can see that we got a lot of added styles and everything in here for free. And you don't have to be familiar with Bootstrap to use this, but if you are, then you can see that we have some Bootstrap classes in here. So we have these form groups, we have an asterisk for the required fields, so that's nice. This is a column form labeled here. So all kinds of different things that we just get out of the box with that default Crispy tag. So that's really nice. So now let me close down out of the view source here and go back to our field and resize that back to the normal size. Now, not only does our form look better, but the errors will also look much better and give us some better feedback. So let's fill out our form with some errors and see what this looks like. So I'm going to fill in a username that already exists. So I'll do Corey MS. I'll do just fill in a password of Corey M. Schafer at gmail.com. For the password, I'll put in passwords that do not match. So just some gibberish there. Sign up. Okay, so we can see that it added classes to our form fields so that it highlights the fields with problems in red and then puts the error text underneath in red so that we know exactly what's wrong. And that's a lot better than the feedback that we had before, where it was really hard to even see what was going on. So we can see here that it obviously says a user with that username already exists, and we can definitely tell the error here is the two password fields didn't match. Okay, so now we have a nicely styled functional form here that can actually create users on the front end and also gives us some nice validation feedback on the front end as well. Okay, so I think that is going to do it for this video. I hope that you got a pretty good idea for how you can create a user registration page for our Django application. And in the next video, we'll be learning how to expand on this and create a user authentication system so that users can log in and log out through the front end of the website as well. And we'll also learn how to create pages that can only be accessed by users who are logged into the website. But if anyone has any questions about what we covered in this video, then feel free to ask in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer those. And if you enjoyed these tutorials and would like to support them, then there are several ways you can do that. The easiest way is to simply like the video and give it a thumbs up. And also it's a huge help to share these videos with anyone who you think would find them useful. And if you have the means, you can contribute through Patreon, and there's a link to that page in the description section below. Be sure to subscribe for future videos, and thank you all for watching.